Well, I messed up the first one, so maybe this will be more concise. Hello, this is Benjamin Boyce, and welcome to my YouTube channel / podcast extraordinaire systemization of conversation. Today's guest is Ben, alias GNC-Centric, on Twitter and YouTube. I stumbled across her YouTube channel about the time that I found the Peak Resilience Project, and I found this young woman to be incredibly straightforward, refreshingly open, even dealing with the most problematic material. By problematic, I mean incendiary material. She had a kind of a very intense youth and then got involved in LGBT communities in Toronto and then in the kink community online and then I suppose locally. And she details her experiences in these groups, and they're rather harrowing and I guess borderline explicit, but certainly stuff that's got to be carefully handled. And the way that I want to frame this, to contextualize this, to quote that fabulous academic Nathan Rambukkana, the way that I want to positionality us towards these stories is to say that in any human organization, in any group, where there is a lapse or a lack of accountability, there will be an abuse of power. So wherever there's no oversight or very explicit rules that distinguish people in power from people who are not in power, those who are in power, whether implicitly or explicitly, will end up abusing the most vulnerable people. And the way that abuse happens is going to vary depending on the MO of the group and the MO of the people who are in that group. So, that being said, there should be more openness about this topic. This is entering into territory that I'm sure will be weaponized or potentially weaponized, but I think it's important to know, and I also want to plug her channel. It's down in the description. I'll put a link up there. She's definitely somebody for you to watch, especially if you're young and you're questioning or you're feeling kind of dicey about the way that your life and your sexuality is flourishing and being discovered and then being talked about online. And if you're an adult and you're interested in these things, I think that she has a very refreshing viewpoint. And I think she's going to go pretty far in her life. She also plays music, and I didn't get her to play any music for me. So that all being said, here's Ben, alias GNC-Centric. Hey.
Hi.
How's it going?
I'm good. I haven't been on Skype in like over a year. This is very strange for me.
Why is it strange? Just talking to somebody?
Yeah, also like all of this stuff, I've only brought it onto YouTube like in the last month because I'm way more confident with my writing skills than my speaking skills. Yeah.
Where does your writing end up going?
Most of it was on Tumblr when I was younger, but now I have a Medium.
Oh, okay. How long you been doing the Medium thing?
About a month, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
How many articles do you have out already?
I think 4.
Oh.
Yeah.
You're coming out of the gate just...
Well, I was like, I've just been kind of, the more I see more people transitioning for ridiculous reasons, the more I'm concerned that younger people are going to take medical steps without fully comprehending. Or even, like, for me, I thought the only option was transition. I just want people to hear that there's other options if you have dysphoria.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, well, I guess we can dive right in.
Just before we start,
yeah.
In one of your videos, you were like, I feel weird asking questions, sexual questions, because I'm older. I don't know if you've seen my videos, but they're pretty TMI. Feel free to ask me whatever you want.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, your YouTube channel is refreshingly too much information.
Yeah, that's what I was going for, because people will describe dysphoria and they'll just describe sexual attraction, but what does that mean when you're a kid and you have no context?
Absolutely. Yeah, you have a very open book about it. And while you're being an open book, you seem the way that you're doing it is very honest, and it's not like you're trying to convince anybody. You're just speaking your own truth.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which, like, while I was in the trans community, there's the whole idea of, like, male privilege and all that kind of nonsense. So, and also to do with passing, I really hate my voice. So while I identified as trans, I've literally spoke less. And like on Tumblr, I didn't post much about like what I was experiencing. It was more like, well, how what I'm doing affects the trans community. Like it wasn't about me. So now that I kind of have like the power to just speak about myself without being influenced like that, it's it's really refreshing. Yeah.
You brought up male privilege in the trans community. Is that assigned to you when you are female to male? Then you
Yeah,
automatically get male
it's so
privilege?
ridiculous. Yeah, like okay, it's the most ridiculous. Like I remember the first time I ever went to a trans youth group, I was 15. I hadn't come out to anybody. Like just I had like five friends or something that knew, but like my school, my family, nobody knew. And I remember going there and there was discussions of male privilege and people were talking about how even closeted trans men, so somebody who appears to be like a teenage girl, has male privilege over trans women. And I was just like, what is wrong with you people? Like if you walk in, like you step out into the world to interact with people, nobody's treating you like a man. It doesn't make any sense. Yeah. And like that's a reason that you're told to shut up quite often because
Really?
you have privilege. Yeah. And it's like I have a story. Okay, so you know in Canada we have Bill C-16.
Yeah.
So before it was passed, I don't know what year this was. Um, I so me and my younger trans guy friend, we were part of this trans youth group, and some people were making posters for like a C-16 rally, and we were like, oh, well, we can't go to the rally, but we can go to help make the posters. So we were at the basement of this community center, and it was us two trans guys. Like he was 15, I was 16, and there were three trans women who were all like 40s and 50s, like much older. And I had just been to the gynecologist like a week before or something, and I was discussing with my trans guy friend like how I hated my period and how going to the gynecologist gave me dysphoria and stuff like that. And these trans women, they like interrupted us and they were like, "Oh, you don't know what kind of a privilege it is to have your period and have the capacity to bear life, and you don't know like how much like you have cramps, but we just wish we had cramps." And like all this bullshit. And I was like, they literally were objectifying our suffering as a kind of fantasy for themselves. And we were like I don't know, I think I was 16, and like you're conditioned with this, you have privilege, you shouldn't talk. So we were just like, oh yeah, that's too bad you can't actually like get a uterus and have periods. Like we didn't say much, but like for trans men when they go to the gynecologist, I don't know if you saw my video about how I spent like 2 days in bed, like curled up, crying, like unable to move, like depressed. Like, and our periods are a huge source of our dysphoria. But whenever you talk about it, you're told you have privilege and that you're triggering trans women, so you can't talk about it.
Hmm.
And like, it's just ridiculous. It really upsets me how like young females are just basically told to shut up.
Do you think that is kind of why, from my perspective, just being an observer and not knowing that much about this still, um, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of vocal trans men. Do you think that's
Exactly. Yeah.
because it's suppressed and they're trained in the movement, not to
Like
represent the
there's
movement?
two things I think that are really big. First is like now that I've stepped back from the trans community, I can really see like female and male socialization. Like females are more like I not naturally, but they're it's more expected of them to be like nurturing and understanding and supportive. And trans men are nurturing and understanding and supportive. Like we take all the trans women's ideology and we internalize it and we support them. But like exactly what you said, in that process of studying to be part of the ideology, you've silenced yourself. So yeah, it's that's something that really upsets me.
So you, a female to male, enters into this group, and not only are they female on the outside, not only are they struggling with their femininity or their femaleness on the
Mhm.
inside, uh, but they enter into this support group, and then they're cast to the bottom of the
Yeah,
pile, and
exactly.
they're forced to be. You get the worst of both worlds,
Exactly.
and you're like
Yeah,
the atlas for everybody else's suffering.
exactly. Yeah, it's so disturbing when you think about like this is probably a 14-year-old girl who's like sexually repressed or has eating disorder or something like depression. Like this is just some kid basically. Yeah. And like you talked with Helena about social media a bit, and it's like you said, like uh, you kind of indoctrinate yourself. Like I've been studying Scientology recently, and they have a mandatory 2.5 hours a day of studying. Do you know like the average amount of time a trans kid spends on Tumblr a day?
No.
Way more than 2.5 hours. Do you know the average amount of time trans kids watch YouTube a day? Like that can combine with Tumblr way more than 2.5 hours. You're just at such a young age when you're just learning how to like think for yourself. You're just like inundating yourself with these like ideologies that you're internalizing and taking on as your own, but you haven't actually done any of your own self exploration. You're just absorbing this stuff. Um,
What initiated you wanting to study this stuff and delving into this stuff, and what made it rapider and deeper?
yeah, I'm actually a little bit different than most of my friends. So at the beginning, like when I was 13, 14, it was just YouTube videos and Tumblr posts and whatever. But by the time I was like 15, 16, I would actually go to the public library and look up, like, I remember looking up stuff by, what's the autogynephilia doctor? Blanchard.
Blanchard?
I remember like looking up like really big books that are just like references and like reading through the stuff. Or I remember I read everything Julia Sereno I could get my hands on, and I went to her book readings. And at University of Toronto, sometimes when they had like new book releases, or they would have like open lectures about queer theory and stuff, I would go to all that stuff. Most of my friends didn't do that, but it was because um, like I saw stuff on Tumblr, but it all seemed so theoretical to me. I wanted to see like the real world, how it works. Um,
Hmm.
so I went like full blown into the whole queer theory thing. Um, yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with also you're told like this is feminism, this is what like we're gaining equality. It again, it's kind of like a cult. You're told like this is what you can do to fix the world. You're going to make the world a better place. So then, of course, why wouldn't you spend all your time invested in that?
Well, you make your own world, your own self a better
Yeah,
person, and or you fix the problems through this, and then you get
yeah,
to fix the world too.
yeah. Well, it's like I was kind of tweeting about this. It's like they tell you had like if you had like gender confusion or issues with your body or your sexuality, you didn't know what it was, but you come up to them and you say, "Oh, I have these problems," and they're like, "Oh, you're trans." So it's like they diagnose the problem and then they tell you how to fix the problem. Like, "Oh, then you need to transition." So from the beginning, like you might not really have thought about it for yourself. You're just kind of told, like, explained, this is what you're going through. Yeah,
You
it's
mentioned trans youth group. Who leads these things, and who's the who are the high
oh,
priests of this on the internet?
uh, okay. So I wrote an article for Fourth Wave Now, about this. I'll link it to you so you can put it in the description if you'd like.
Will do.
So often these trans youth groups are led by older trans people. Um, it makes sense to me. Like if you had a gay youth group, you'd want it to be led by a gay person, right? But the problem is if you're unsure about your gender or if you want to transition and you go to these kinds of groups, you immediately see somebody that did what you want to do. So it's like not even a question of can I do it? It's like, oh, they're trans, I want to be trans. There I go. Like this is my path. They're going to help me. That's it. Like so there's no step of questioning really.
Yeah.
So in my thing I wrote about Morgan Page. I don't know if you know who she is, or he is a trans woman. Um, but they had what do you call a workshop at Planned Parenthood Toronto about overcoming the cotton stealing, which was basically like a pickup artisty thing for trans women to hook up with lesbians.
Yeah.
This was in 2012. I was completely out of my periphery. I didn't hear about it until after I left the trans community, and I didn't realize that was the person who had been leading my trans youth group for 3 years until after I left.
Huh.
This person in the trans youth group, it was kind of like Tumblr come alive. We discussed erotic fan fiction. We discussed like specific techniques for doing specific sexual acts. We discussed like kinky stuff. We talked about porn. And the most disturbing thing was like, it was similar to that other C16 story. There was like always like less than 4 trans men, and they were all under the age of 18, and there was always more than like 5 trans women or non-binary males who were like over the age of 20. So the power dynamic in the room was always very off. Like, so when they were discussing sexual stuff, sometimes Morgan would turn to us and be like, "Oh, is this cool with you guys?" But it's like, if it's not cool with one of us and we're younger and we're sitting at a big table, we're not going to tell everybody to stop talking. And especially when you consider like this is an insecure teenage female, basically. So yeah, it was like everything on Tumblr was becoming real life for me. Like people were actually telling me like, "Oh, you're a trans misogynist for these reasons," like to my face. And like one of my most memorable experiences was, so my trans friend was 15, this trans guy, and I was 16, and we were talking to this trans woman who was like 25, and she called herself a lesbian. And we were like walking down the street to McDonald's after the trans youth group or something, and she was explaining to us like how we exhibit trans misogyny and how we need to like learn to like listen and support trans women more. And I was like, this person has access to hormones, this person has like a good full-time job with like a pension, this person has like their living situation is under their control. Both of us are like closeted, living at home with like eating disorders and like mental health issues that are untreated, like, and they're telling us we have privilege and we need to like be quiet and listen to their stories more. It's just like at the time I was totally drinking the Kool-Aid, but the thing about telling me to be quiet, I never really like was okay with that. And also, like I said, I wasn't aware of the cotton ceiling at that time, but as soon as I like became aware of the situation, I was totally not okay with that either. Those were two of my big kind of like, I don't know, I guess like signs that something
This
was up.
sounds like the worst fear of, a conservative person thinking, well, this is just a group for grooming young
It
women.
basically is. Like I also mentioned in that article, and in my kink video, that I once knew a 14-year-old trans man who was in a relationship with like a 25-year-old trans woman, and like the trans woman was the dom and the trans man was the sub. So what you have is like a 25-year-old male who has like a sub who's like a 14-year-old girl. What is that? That's pedophilia. Like what is that? That's sexual abuse. But for some reason in the trans community, because the younger one is considered to be the man, it's like fine. Or because it's like kinky and we're in like a sex positive environment, it's unquestionable. Like those are the things that happen, and the most disturbing things that happen in that group, like those relationships happened outside the group and we would sometimes talk about them, but within the actual group, a couple of times. Do you know what a tranny chaser is?
uh, Kind of like an ambulance chaser, so a lawyer who
That
tries
would
to
be interesting.
sue people
No,
into taking hormones.
it's somebody who has a fetish for trans people.
Yeah.
So I didn't realize until I was in the group that there are tranny chasers who are themselves trans. So there would be like us trans men who were like under the age of 18, all of us, probably under the age of 16 during this story. And there was these trans women who were in their 40s, and they came in and they were literally hitting on us, and they were like being very explicit and very sexual about our bodies. And it's like, we have dysphoria, we came here to talk about our dysphoria, our trans stuff, and they're like talking about like, I don't know, I don't want to say on camera, but very explicit things. And people, they didn't want to kick them out, they didn't want to tell them to stop, they just kept like changing the subjects. And I was like, I was shocked, because this is supposed to be a place for young people to come and explore and be safe. Like, what the hell is that? That's not safe. That's not a good like environment for exploration. Yeah. The only time they were ever kicked out, Morgan was away, and this other trans man filled in for her. And it's really telling to me that the only time that these predators were ever kicked out was when a trans man was in charge. So a female person who could relate to the females in the room who were being like objectified. Yeah.
It just makes me wonder if the trans youth groups should be sex segregated.
Yeah, well, that's the thing too, is they're actually, I remember when I first found this youth group, so I was looking in Toronto, there's the 519, which is like it's like a LGBT community center. And so they have all kinds of stuff, like being like an LGBT parent, that kind of thing, like, support groups, events. But there was like a couple of different groups, like for like trans women sex workers to get food and condoms, and there's like I don't know, but I just remember looking up, there was like multiple groups that were focused around trans women or non-binary people, but there was like no groups at all for trans men, like at all. So that's why I was going to that one. There wasn't any for trans
Oh,
men.
okay. Hmm.
Yeah.
Has that
Um,
changed so far as you know?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Like I moved to the middle of nowhere, literally the middle of nowhere, 3,000 kilometers away from Toronto, and I'm not really in contact with anybody there, and I don't go to any LGBT events because I'm so sick of being asked my pronouns. It's just like leave me alone. So I kind of disconnected from that whole community at this point. And also like when I detransitioned, a lot of my friends like they took it personally. So and also once you detransition, it doesn't mean you don't want to transition anymore. It means you've consciously made the decision that transition will not fix your problems,
Okay.
usually. So seeing my friends who were transitioning or who are transitioning is kind of painful because like I want to do what they want, what they're doing, even though if I know on an intellectual level that yeah, so I'm not really connected with those people anymore. Yeah.
Did you have dysphoria before you started researching this stuff?
Yeah, that's what I think is different than me and the peak resilience people. Like if you watch all of my dysphoria videos, which is like an hour, um, but uh, I talk about how most of my dysphoria started when I was like prepubescent, and it's yeah, so I don't think it's rapid onset, and I like it still exists to this day. It's just kind of morphed into something different.
Okay. And so when you recognized that transition wasn't helping you resolve these other problems, or that gender dysphoria was caught up with a bunch of other things, um, did that come as a relief, or did you just completely start to rebuild how you were thinking about your various difficulties?
Well, it kind of didn't happen in that order. So actually, after I became gender critical, I was still trans for almost 2 years, which made me very niche. There's almost no gender critical at the time. There was almost no gender critical trans people on Tumblr. And actually, I just want to say that is when I got the most hate on the entire in my entire journey. The most hate I got was when I was a gender critical trans person because I was there openly asking like, "Oh, do you have are you concerned with like what queer theory is? Do you have questions about dysphoria, that kind of thing?" I was like, "Come talk to me." And I got like rape threats and death threats and all that kind of stuff, like from trans people. Like they would say like you're a traitor, you're a turf, whatever. But yeah, so I had like all these little peak trans moments kind of where I noticed like the narcissist males who were in charge or how like they were silencing female victims of sexual assault within the community. Like trans men being assaulted by trans women is actually pretty common, but you're not allowed to talk about it because it's enforcing transphobic stereotypes.
Hmm.
So that's
How
it.
did you get
It's just not
turned
talk.
on to gender criticalism? Uh,
Um.
ist-
Okay. So my best friend at the time, kind of still, he's like an actual homosexual gay man, and we tried like dating online, and then we realized like queer ideology is bullshit. I'm a female and he's a male and he's homosexual, and this not doesn't work. So, um, we were kind of like confused. We're like, what the hell? Queer ideology is bullshit. So we're he had a friend from childhood who had briefly identified as trans and then detransitioned, and she was a lesbian. And he was like, we should talk to my friend. So we started talking to her, and she got me um, into the gender critical stuff on Tumblr. And I found one post that was just like it was just like links to different books, and I went nuts. I At that time in my life, I was skipping school so much, like I couldn't handle being there, and I couldn't handle people talking to me and all kinds of stuff. But I would skip school almost every day and go to McDonald's or like Starbucks and then just read Andrea Dworkin and write like really long blog posts on Tumblr about it. And but I still identified as a trans man. Like so I realized that gender was all like costume and it was like nothing. And I thought gender ideology or gender identity was garbage. But I thought I have dysphoria. This is the only way that I can see for myself to manage my dysphoria, which is I think that's the view of most gender critical trans people or the trans rational people. Um, but like when I moved to university and I was completely away from my family and my like the environment that had been causing me stress, and I finally was able to just be Ben, and everybody called me Ben, and there was like no question. I could finally, for the first time in my life, like actually address inside of me what was going on.
Okay.
So it was like the first time I ever like realized, like, a lot of gender dysphoria has to just do with you not being able to pass. Like, I never liked my chest or my breasts, I guess. But the more I tried to pass, the more I hated them because the more of an impediment they became. So when I stopped trying to pass, a lot of my dysphoria lifted because I had like compounded things that I had felt to the point where they were like a huge issue to me every single day. Yeah. I mean, this was like a really long process too. Like detransitioning journey, it took like over a year for me to really like decide that's what I wanted to do, tell my friends, come out, all that kind of stuff.
Did you
Yeah.
do a non-binary gray zone transition?
No,
You just
actually, I thought that was interesting. The other people, um, no, because like I said, I was so gender critical at that point. I completely thought like a part of what made help me detransition was when I became gender critical on Tumblr, people would often like attack me, and I had to, or I didn't have to, but I would defend myself and I would say like I'm a female person, so I know this. And I just feel like the more I said I'm a female person, the more I said I'm a female who experiences this, I kind of, because before I had been identifying as a male, which like you can't identify as a biological reality, like you can't just identify into having a penis. It doesn't work that way. So I finally was like accepting that I'm a female, and the more I said it, the more I was like relating to the other female on Tumblr who were like gender non-conforming lesbians and stuff, and I could see myself in them a little bit more. So by the time I decided to do transition, I was just thinking of myself as a gender non-conforming female. I didn't think of myself as a woman really, because that was still kind of painful. Um, like I remember when I first found gender critical feminists, they would call me sister, and I was like, whoa, oh, 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 I'm not a female.
hmm.
But like I slowly became to like accept that I am a female. Yeah, I think that identifying as a male really made my dysphoria worse because like if you tell yourself a man and then you look down at your body and you're not a man, like that hurts. And if you do that to yourself every day, it just hurts worse. Yeah.
Did you want to? Was the seat of your dysphoria inside of you in the beginning, and then became more and more outside of you as you
Yeah, for
progressed in?
sure. Like like I mentioned in my one of my videos, like the first time I had an issue with my chest was just when I started growing breasts. I felt like there was like a bruise on my rib cage. I was like, what the hell is that? I remember putting on my seatbelt and being like, what the hell is this thing between my rib cage and my seatbelt? I even went to the doctor and I was like, there's something on my chest. What the hell is that? Make it go away. And she kind of like laughed at me and she was like, oh, you poor child, you're just going through dysphoria. And I was like, or puberty. And I was like, what the hell is wrong with you people? Why can't you take me seriously? This is like an actual big problem. None of you think it's important. So it was like very internal at that point in my life. I don't know how old it was, like 9 or something. And but then like I said, like the more I tried to pass, the more um the more I tried, yeah, just the more I tried to pass, the more my dysphoria got worse. And also like with sexuality, when I started my transition journey, now looking back, I think I knew on some level since I was young that I was lesbian, but it was like really deep in the back of my mind, like really deep. So when I started my transition journey, I thought of myself as, oh, I'm not heterosexual. I'm something different. I'm something weird. I have to figure that out. But like trying to relate to people but from my male identity doesn't really work when you're physically female, like in a sexual way. It doesn't make any sense. So I think, I don't know, it just kind of confused me, and it confuses a lot of kids, I think. Um, Especially with the whole like eroticizing gay relationships and eroticizing and romanticizing like gay sex, especially on Tumblr and stuff like that, is like huge. So my perception of myself was not in a sexual setting was not accurate. It was more of a fantasy.
Hmm.
Yeah. So
Do you
I don't
think
know.
that's because you were exposed to sexuality before you experienced it? And by that I mean you
100%.
got all your sexuality from a screen, not from some sort of welling up.
100%. Like, I'm gonna make a video on this about like my reading habits and how they kind of informed some things. But like, so when I was younger, like under the age of 12, I was reading like Dragonlance and Mech Warrior and like I don't know if you know this, like fantasy sci-fi stuff. Like they're all adult books. And then so when I was like 12, 13, 14, I was like more interested in romance. So I started reading heterosexual romance and I was like, this is disgusting. Why are the women so helpless and useless?
Okay.
Why are the men running around doing everything? I was like, this is garbage. So then I found a bunch of books about like women who went undercover to become knights or women who went undercover to like be like soldiers in the military, stuff like that. And I thought that was super cool, but and it became every part of my life. I would watch like K dramas about that. I would like I don't know. I was really obsessed with that. And then I found all this gay romance stuff. And immediately in my brain I was like, if I'm a boy, I can be in the gay romance stuff. So like all of this idea of like being on equal footing with my partner because if we're both men, it's like equal and like being homosexual but not having to deal with the fact that I'm a female. Like that was the big part of me being like a gay man was I was so disgusted with my body and I was so like distant and like it was so incomprehensible to me because I had never felt sexual. Like I had no connection to my sexual self. So it was much easier to just take on the role of someone else and become that person.
That's
Mm-hmm.
very odd because if you're having fantasies about gay sex, then you're capitalizing on an attraction to the male.
Yeah.
But you say that you're lesbian, so like and again, sorry, in your natural experience of, real life sexuality, were you attracted to women? The woman
Well, that's the
form,
thing.
the
Like,
shape, the
so I never felt attraction till I was 18 or
oh,
like physical arousal till I was 18. I think because I started going on antidepressants, like a really high dose when I was 13.
oh.
That like that's 100% it. When I went off my antidepressants, like the next week I had sexual arousal.
So that stunted the
100%.
wiring, I guess.
Yeah, and also like I started taking Ritalin when I was a kid, and that stunted me also. Like I was the tallest kid in my class, like all that kind of stuff. Like I had a lot of chemical stuff in my youth that like affected me. Sorry, what was the
Because
what were we talking about?
you
Oh,
got
gay sex. Yeah. It's like
you
so,
got go.
oh yeah.
I'm taking note.
Yeah, like um I think I just wanted to be like an object. I didn't want to be like a participant really because I didn't know what I wanted. Like which is the same thing. I don't know if you saw my video about me like in the kink community. It's the same thing. Like I didn't know what I wanted, but I wanted to make people happy and I wanted to have a relationship. So I thought I would just kind of like take on the persona of somebody to be bossed around and told what to do and then that would like I didn't have to think or do anything for myself
Do you think that this
because I didn't have
was?
the tools to do anything for myself.
Could you
Like
repeat
I
that?
didn't have the tools to explore my what was inside of me
Yeah.
and they weren't being given to me by like my community.
Okay. So it seems like you were taken up and through a series of uh, circumstances to be set in a really abusive series of communities and relationships.
Yeah.
Um,
Like I actually realized this morning in the shower, like as a kid I lived in like a up till the age of like 12, my parents micromanaged me and my sister like a ton and our whole lives were very very structured. Then after like at the age of like 14 my we kind of became latchkey kids. Like something happened in our family and like our parents were never around after that. And I think I was like now looking back I think I was kind of looking for somewhere that I could like have a structure to fit into the way I had at home. Like someone telling me what to do so I can be productive and useful and feel like not shitty about myself. I was just looking for that somewhere else. Yeah.
yeah. And how did Ritalin and psychiatric drugs get introduced to you? Were you just somebody saw you being sad and they threw you at a
This is like
doctor?
also feeds into my whole like don't talk thing. So I have like ADHD. I don't know if it's obvious or not. But So as a kid, I was like hyperactive, and my parents were like, "Well, this is a problem." So they took me to like a doctor or whatever, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you have ADHD." Um, the doctor who did like the full workup to see if I have ADHD, I really like him. I still talk to him, but then after I was sent to this like doctor who like he specialized in like the medication, and yeah, so I was on Ritalin for a few years, and then some people in the U.S. died. So then I switched to Strattera. Strattera is literally a depressant. Do you know how it fixes ADHD? By making you so depressed that you're quiet. I'm not joking. That's what it is. And I was on it for 10 years. From the age of like, I think like 11 till like, I went off it like last year till like 21. And they had huge effects on me. Like, Strattera used to be used as a weight loss drug. So I was like 90 pounds and like 5'6" and like anorexic, and it's literally because of the medication I was on, but nobody, like the doctors or my parents, never thought I should just go off of it. Like, all this kind of stuff had huge effects on my life. But like I said, my parents were more concerned with me like being quiet and sitting still and behaving than anything else. Um,
Did you ever take hormones for
no.
transition? Okay.
Like I think I put this story up a few days ago, but so I was seeing like a counselor through youth services as a teenager. She was mostly helping me with my family stuff because that was like way more like in the moment that was way more of an issue. But once that kind of settled down, she wrote me like a letter, and I went to there's okay, when I was 15 and I started going to youth groups, getting hormones seemed like a complicated thing. You had to like join some kind of group where you'd go for like 6 months to do like group sessions to talk about your transness, and then after they'd give you hormones. Or you had to go on a waiting list at this clinic, and the waiting list was 6 months. But by the time I was 17, it was like, oh, there's these walk-in clinics where one day a week you can go and they'll just give you hormones. And there's like, oh, these doctors, these like 4 doctors, they're all trans, and even if they have a waiting list, they'll let you skip the waiting list if you just want hormones. Like, if by the time I was 17, it's like so easy to get hormones. That was like 5 years ago. I can't imagine how easy it is to get hormones now. But she knew I wasn't out to my parents. The doctor knew I wasn't out to my parents, and they gave me a script for testosterone. Do you know what that does to your body? You can't hide that. Like, so I had it in my backpack for a month, and I kept wanting to fill it. But like I was obsessed with the YouTubers who transitioned, right? So I knew what testosterone would do to me, and I was like, you can't just take that when you're living with your parents and you're closeted and nobody will notice. I was like, how the fuck can a doctor give this to a child? Like, I was 17. I wasn't a child, but like, in the grand scheme of things, you're still a child when you're 17. Like, I don't know. So I ended up throwing it away because it was so tempting that I wanted to take it, but I knew it was like a bad idea. So I ended up throwing away the script. My plan was like when I moved to university, like this was literally my plan. I would move to university, I would get a doctor, I would go on hormones, and I would get a doctor and have surgery. And like I didn't really like my family, so I thought I'd see them like 1 week at Christmas, 1 week in the summer, and I would just come home one time and be like, I'm a man. Too bad. That was my plan. But like I said, by the time I got to university here, I kind of had like space to explore things for myself. Yeah. And I didn't get like a therapist when I moved here. Of course I should have, but like being around the gender critical people who were like questioning things and talking about like the roots and the basis of dysphoria, it was the first time in my life I really considered that. Like the whole time I was with that like therapist counselor woman, her partner was trans, and I think that like gave her bias, but she never asked like, do you think your eating disorder could be related to your dysphoria? Or she never asked like, do you think what's your sexuality, how comfortable are you with it, do you think that could have an effect on your dysphoria? Like, she never ever asked these questions. She gave me a few coping techniques for anxiety, and then she was like, oh, I'm just gonna like, we're gonna help keep everything together for now until I can get you to hormones. That was basically like the plan, which is the plan for everyone now. I told her, I was like, because I had a really close friend who had like a lot of body image issues, and they were doing cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy for body dysmorphia. And I told my therapist, I was like, can we apply some of those methods for body dysmorphia to my issue? And she was like flabbergasted. She couldn't understand what I was asking her. And I was like, if these are the people, even at that time when I was like drinking the Kool-Aid, I was like, shouldn't the therapists have some kind of like, I don't know, shouldn't they explore something? Shouldn't they be critical, ask questions, push you, make you uncomfortable before you make this huge decision? I mean, I thought that, but also I was like, I have so much shit to deal with. If I don't have to go through any of that to get the hormones I want, then that's good for me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So it seems like you had a chemical pubescence.
Yeah.
If you're on a depressant and you're on Ritalin, and then you said that your automatic or your natural sexuality didn't become emerge into your awareness until after you got off the drugs. But at the same time, before then, you were delving into various sexual communities and various sexual activities. The sex wasn't about pleasure then; it was about a form of communication or a
Yeah, like
form of intimacy.
yeah, intimacy, exactly. I think I wanted attention, I wanted love, I wanted I was also I'm an extremely curious person. I just like even it's kind of gross, but I mean I was trans and like I wanted a penis. And I didn't understand how a penis worked or what it did or anything. And I wanted
Well,
like
why did you want it then?
okay, so it's like you
Just to not have what you did have?
well that's how it started. So like
Okay.
it's like you said at the beginning it was internal. At the beginning it was internal of I don't want to be female. But by the end of it was like I need to be a male so that I can be comfortable. Like it morphed over the years. So yeah, at the beginning I was like didn't want to be a female, but I was like, oh, if I'm trans, I'll get a phalloplasty one day, and I want to know how a penis is supposed to work and all that. And like I said, I was thinking of myself as a gay man, so I was like just interested in gay sex, I guess. But ironically, most of the men I was like sexting with or cyber sexting with were all heterosexual because I'm a female, of course.
Hmm.
Which like invalidates queer theory on its face, but like that's a normal thing that happens all the time. Anyway,
Hmm.
yeah, so I was just interested in like penises. I was interested in how sex worked. I was interested in how people are aroused, what gets them turned on.
But
Like
all from a
theoretical.
intellectual, theoretical.
Yeah. Like
Huh.
I was like sexting with people on a regular basis from like 15 to 18, like almost daily, but I wasn't feeling anything or doing
It's
anything.
like some form of research.
Yeah. Or and also it was like I felt like I was making the people that I liked and that liked me happy.
Okay.
It was like a form of like I don't know, like
Petting.
male validation or something,
Yeah.
you know? Yeah. I don't know. And like I said, like it made me feel useful. I have this thing about feeling useful.
Yeah.
Um yeah.
It's
It
it seems you're older now, and I'm sure. Hmm, I almost said something that get me in a lot of trouble. Um, how how manipulated, looking back, do you think you were in that,
that's the thing
or
is like
how much were you just putting yourself out there for that to happen?
I think there's not like a specific there's one person I can kind of point to who manipulated me, but that was older when I was 17. I think it's mostly social. Like it's not like one person or two people told me like, oh, this is good, you should get into it. It's like I was just inundated with like you've probably seen in my videos I talked about like a lot of trans people who do sex work have like a link to their sex work Twitter, and then on that Twitter there's like all these nudes and videos and stuff. And like I saw and followed all these people since I was like 14. So like I saw kink all the time. It just seemed normal.
Hmm.
Just seemed like and they present it as like you know how you're supposed to explore your gender like on Tumblr they talk about that exploring your sexuality is almost approached with the exact same thing. It's like, oh, if you want to try being a sub, go for it. If you want to try being a dom, go for it. If you want to try like I don't know, bondage or whatever, it's like go for it, even though you're like a teenager and you don't know what you're doing really.
And yeah, there's no gating for the teenagers.
Yeah, and like that's the big thing too is like when I talk about all the stuff I was doing, it was with like adults, you know, in their 20s, like 30s, and I was literally a teenager. And like we would flirt with each other openly on public Twitter all the time, and like nobody ever questioned that like a younger person was like flirting with older people and like saying sexual stuff to them. And like it was so obvious that we were just going into DMs to like continue our stuff, and like nobody questioned that.
How did
Or
how did you detransition out of that community? Then,
um
assuming that you walked away from it.
well, okay, so I have like that kink video up that kind of goes into this more, but um so I kind of got like an online dom. Well, I don't know, I need to put it in quotes. He was my dom. When I was 17, from when I think it was like about a year, but basically he was like one of the first people I met and I could talk to who had like real firsthand experience of all the stories I had been reading, like going to sex clubs and parties and like I don't know, gangbangs or whatever, like really horrible stuff. He had like actual firsthand experience of how this stuff went. And he talked to me about it, and he was like, no, this part is actually horrible. Like if somebody asks you to do that, don't ever do that. He like warned me about a bunch of shit, but he was willing to be my dom. Just he was like warning me about the unhealthy elements of the community. Anyway, I was his sub for like a couple months, a year-ish, and eventually I just realized I was attracted to the idea of being in a dom-sub relationship, but I actually didn't want to do that, like in real life. And then it was around the same time that I started to realize that the queer community was abusive and was like harboring abusive predators and stuff. And around the same time that I started to realize that there was a lot of like narcissistic personalities who were like leading the conversation in the queer community. And I just realized like I had been given the environment where this was okay. And so I internalized that, but I don't actually know if this is me from the inside.
Mm-hmm.
So, like a couple of months after that, I started like dating my gay guy friend, and it was like completely not that. He was super, super anti-kink. So it was like completely out of my mind. And then after a few months of that, I was like, I realized I never needed that. I was just told, like, there's this idea that if you don't know what you want to do, if you want to please somebody, if you are not assertive, like all these little things that make you a sub. But that's just like a lot of confused teenagers. So every confused teenager could be labeled as a sub, like that. It's like a mechanism for like picking up kids and grooming them. Yeah.
And how did you make peace or realize that you were actually attracted to women then? Was that like a big like, oh duh?
Yeah, actually. Okay, so I was in a master class. I don't know if non-musicians understand this. It's like a lesson but a recital at the same time. So it's like a lesson in front of everybody. I was in a master class, and this cellist that I really liked was playing a Shostakovich piano trio, and there's this huge cello solo at the beginning. And she is such an amazing cellist, and it was so beautiful. And for the first time ever, my body was like, and I was like, whoa, what is that? I was like, what's happening? And I couldn't process what was happening to me. And like later on when I was in my room, I was like, is that what sexual attraction feels like? And I was like, oh my gosh, I like girls. And I was like, do I like boys? I never felt that way about a boy. I was just like, what? So for like a few months, I thought I was bi, because I don't know, it's complicated, but I hadn't, like, my whole fantasy of being with a man hadn't just like gone away overnight, of course. But yeah, I realized I was attracted to women, and then I experienced that attraction like a couple more times to like women, and I never ever experienced it with a man. And I realized like when I imagine myself with a man, it's always like in a like kind of subservient position, but when I imagine myself with a woman, it's more like an equal partnership kind of thing. And I just felt so much more comfortable with that. And I was even now though, it's hard to, after years and years of like wanting a penis and years of thinking I was a gay man, it's hard to completely like take that out of my sexuality, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like it's still something
Did
comes to mind sometimes.
Did experiencing attraction to women help you to begin dealing with dysphoria in a different way?
100%. Because, so up to that point, like I said, I thought of myself as a gay trans man. So I wanted to see myself as a male with another male. then as soon as I realized I was attracted to women, then in my mind, like I was identifying as a male. So I saw myself as a male with a female. And like I said, when I was like 13, 14, reading like romance novels that are heterosexual creeps me out. I didn't want to be in that heterosexual relationship that creeped me out. And now I was going to be like the aggressor. Like in my mind, to be the man in the heterosexual relationship felt almost like, I don't know, I felt extremely uncomfortable, like very unhappy with that. Um, which was confusing to me because if I was really trans and if I had dysphoria and this is how you're supposed to cure dysphoria, shouldn't it like people always say gender and sexuality are not related. So if my gender is male, shouldn't I be able to experience my sexuality regardless of my gender? Like, no, they were lying to me. So, because I realized after a few months, like, I wanted to be with a woman as a woman. I didn't want to be with a woman as a man. So then I was like, well, that's a lesbian. And it was like, ding, ding, ding. I understood finally. But then, like I said, at that point, I still thought transition was my only way of handling my dysphoria. Then I just decided I didn't want a phalloplasty. Like, I never really wanted a phalloplasty, but I always thought, like, eventually, after I've done everything else, I'll get it. But, like, I really wanted hormones, and I really wanted double mastectomy. And I was like, oh, I can be a lesbian. I'll just get hormones and double mastectomy, and then I'll still be biologically female, and I'm a lesbian. I only had that idea for, like, a few months before I detransitioned.
Yeah. I just have to put this out here. Not every heterosexual relationship is a dom-sub kind of thing.
No.
There's plenty of, like, harmonious male-female pair bondings. I just want to say that.
No, of course. Yeah, I think it's just, like, the way that I processed the information I was given. You know what I mean? Yeah. It was like my filter at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you... It seems like your development as a human kind of didn't go in the right order necessarily. Like your brain started processing sexuality before your body prompted the brain to think about it. You had a very controlled childhood and then a very stark drop off, it sounds like, into just freedom. So you weren't given like a gradation of freedom. You're just like dropped in a way. And so you went and you found something to take the place of that structure in a way.
Yeah, which at the time, actually, I thought I was being like independent. I was being grown up. I was like, I'm taking the subway into the city all night and I'm like going to all these things without my parents' knowledge. And I was like, I'm an adult. But it's like, I was part of the herd. I was just following what everybody else was doing. I was fulfilling the requirements of me. I wasn't actually being independent. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you started writing about this and speaking about this on YouTube pretty recently.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you see your role as, or what are you trying to provide other people? And what are you trying to say about what's going on?
Yeah. So a few things. First of all, if you have dysphoria, there's no guarantee that transition will make it better. And and transition is not the only route for you if you have dysphoria. So that's like a big thing, because it's like medical malpractice. It like, say if somebody has cancer and their options are like surgery or chemo, and you only told them about surgery but not chemo, isn't that like malpractice? So how can you tell all these people transition works for them but never told them that you can just be like maybe gender non-conforming and get some therapy and learn to accept your body? That was never presented to me as an option. Also, a lot of kids who fall into this, in my opinion, they're just confused gay kids who haven't come to terms with their sexuality yet. And being gay has a lot to do with rejecting gender roles. So it makes sense how they would be, I don't want to say confused because I don't want it to sound like they're not thinking, but that it would understand why they would like see themselves in that community. And the last thing is just to be careful, because that community, like any other communities, despite being represented as like your glitter family or whatever, there's predators there, and sex positivity is not all fun and games. Yeah.
Well, it could be games, but some not so fun games.
Yeah, definitely. Like the problem with sex positivity is you're always taught to like support everything and not question anything, because to question is to kink shame. But it's like, I don't know if you know about like Daddy Dom Little Girl. kinks. It's like literally like a girl who like dresses like a 5-year-old, and this person literally acts like her literal father, and then they have sex. Like, you can be critical of that considering there's like a huge amount of incest between fathers who rape their daughters. Like, it's not something that you can just swipe away. But even saying that makes you a kink shamer. Like, you couldn't say that if you're in the sex positive community. So like all of these tiny little harms that are happening, you can't criticize them. So you learn like to just not criticize anything anymore.
You
Yeah.
mentioned something called trauma bonding, where people in the kink community inflict trauma on each other, or one person gets trauma, and through that trauma, they're bound up. It's this self reinforcing abusive relationship that's kind of openly accepted or explored, or.
Yeah, like it's literally if you were on FetLife, which don't go on FetLife, but if you were there,
Thanks for the
there,
warning.
or even on Tumblr. Yeah, on Tumblr, there's like entire posts that are like how to like take care of your sub after to make them like more loving and trusting of you, or there's like posts about how to push your sub to the right amount of like pain and trauma that they'll bond with you after, or like it's really disturbing. It's um but they don't see it as a bad thing. They see it as part of like a part of their relationship. um yeah, it's really messed up.
How do we. This is a really big question. You don't have to answer it, or just answer it to the best of your ability. How do we educate young people on how to properly engage with internet sexuality, or how to be aware of how it's not real sexuality? It's a filtered virtual
Yeah,
environment.
like
How do we slow
100%.
that down? Is there a way to slow that down? Is there a way to raise awareness?
I have no idea. Like, you would think that since kids are having sex younger and younger these days, that they would have more of an appreciation for what sexuality really is. But I think what's happening is that gay people or homosexuals, like especially with lesbians come out typically when they're older, and like they realize they're lesbians. I think it's like the average is like 20 years old or something. And um I lost my train of thought. Yeah, I think that like so you would think that kids would have a better appreciation of sex if they're having sex younger, but I don't think that gay people are actually having sex younger that much. Like especially like most of the trans men I know, they're very sexually repressed and like uncomfortable with their body in a sexual way. So like a lot of them like me, they never actually had sex. So they like everything is theoretical to them. And also like with the whole like sex positive thing with like queer identity, all of this stuff is like it's all founded on theoretical principles that are like unrealistic. So
Hmm.
you kind of learn to see things in theoretical ways that are not realistic.
Hmm.
So that if you're seeing your sexuality in a theoretical way that's not realistic, it seems normal to you.
It's very matrixy,
Yeah.
which is ironic because the creators of the Matrix are now
Trans.
trans. And it was supposed to be like the super, like the allegory of trans life, but it's this it's this imagined world where you can interact with people and have relationships and connections, but once that spills over into real life, it doesn't fall out necessarily how the pedo bear, or like the genderbread man, and the poopy unicorn like described it to you, because the theories that build it, that allow this wonderful free for all of exploration and variation and imagination, aren't based on certain principles that
Mm-hmm.
are how real life put itself together, so far as on a
Mm-hmm.
cultural level and then on a biological level.
Mm-hmm.
It's even actively denies biology now. They're coming out more and
Yeah.
more anti-science. Um,
Like when I
that breaks
first
their
started
ethics.
identifying as trans, I used FTM. Like FTM was in my bio, female to male. Like that was everybody. Like every single person on Tumblr had like FTM, MTF, or non-binary. So like by the end when I was identifying as male, I didn't really think about it as like I'm rejecting my femaleness because like I was in denial of my female body, so of course I wasn't thinking about it. But yeah, it's like things this reality is distorted so much to the point where you can't see that it's not real anymore because you've absorbed it so much. Like the whole idea of like gender is basically stereotypes, right? Like how can
Yes.
you can't base an entire ideology on stereotypes when if you're poor and you don't have the money to look feminine, does that mean you're not a trans woman anymore? Like it just doesn't make any like a lot of their stuff doesn't make any
Yeah,
sense.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The performative aspect. Yeah, it's a nest of contradictions. But then adults, consenting adults, can live in a fantasy world and deal with the fallout. What you were illustrating, what the Peak Resilience Project is illustrating, what a couple of psychologists that I've spoken to are illustrating, is that all this theory started in these little communities in academia and then was adopted by kink communities and now is codified and right there on the internet and is now something that young people are being molded by. So not only do we need to find out how to inoculate people from being swept up into a cult like atmosphere, which is basically impossible, but there needs to be more and more resources on how to get out of that, how to deprogram that, how to deal with the trauma. I don't
Yeah.
know if necessarily can wake people up because people are just going to have weird feelings
Like
and then start.
peak trans thing, I
What's
think
the
is
peak
how
trans? I want you to explain it to the audience because it's kind of a thing.
so peak trans is like usually it's like a liberal feminist type person who supports trans ideology and supports trans people. They're like, oh, I support trans people. And then they see something like Rachel what's his name?
McKinnon?
Yeah, like Rachel McKinnon attacking
Martina.
um, yeah, Tina for like so you see like a lesbian icon being attacked by some trans woman who wants to have like to cheat basically. And then a lot of people will be like, "Oh wait, that's trans ideology, but in the real world that just means they're cheating." Or stuff like that, like where or like when trans women are transferred into female prisons and then they rape someone, like they have like a click moment like, "Oh, the ideology doesn't prevent real life." So for me, I had quite a few of those like little moments along the way over the years until it kind of like finally clicked. But cult survivors have this thing they call popping when you leave the cult when reality like sticks back into place and you realize everything you've been living is like kind of fake. And I definitely had that when I finally it clicked in my mind that like I had like a list in my mind of like these are the narcissistic trans women who are like on Twitter. These are like the abusive trans women who are on Twitter. And it clicked in my mind like, oh, all these people are male. They all have male biology and male socialization. And I finally was like, wait, despite all of the Julia Sereno and the Judith Butler, they're still a male person doing male shit. So it finally like clicked for me. That was kind of when things popped for me.
Yeah, there's one critique that popped up, and I can't completely ascribe to it because I have problems with the framework, but it's the gender critical framework. But the basically the statement is, if I can butcher it, is that the patriarchy as a pattern of behavior that men exhibit to dominate women and to control them is being completely unveiled by the trans community and the way that trans women are treating women. And I see that a lot, and that's
Mm-hmm.
why on a level, the transrational folks they make it a point. Kinesis, she makes it a point. We've spoken about this that and other old school classic trans women
Yeah,
like I want to become a woman. I have to play by the rules and I have to be
exactly.
like the best representative of somebody who's entering that space, because I think that there's just different power dynamics when a man is around women. There's just different power dynamics. I know we can critique that endlessly, but that's very worrisome. And like you say, the pattern of behavior is that we have a bunch of male abusers that are using the cover of this gender ideology to get themselves off or get themselves in power or shut it down other people.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I agree with most of what Kinesis says. Yeah. Most of what you just said. Yeah.
So
Um,
What caused you to speak out then? I mean, I guess you talked about your reasons, but what was the moment? Or did you just have so much material that you just had to throw it down?
Yeah, it was kind of like that. It's pretty cathartic. Like, most of what I'm writing and making videos about right now, it seems, I don't know if it seems like unprepared or like I'm not working hard, but it's pretty emotionally exhausting to like explain all this stuff and re-experience it. But
Yeah.
actually, what it is I just with the Peak Resilience Project, they were talking about like medical stuff and family stuff more, I feel. And I wanted to talk to people who are kind of experiencing this like on their own without their family's involvement or who I don't know. I just wanted to get my voice out there because it's slightly different. And also, I don't think I had rapid onset. So, in case anybody else doesn't have rapid onset, maybe they'll relate more to me. Um, Also, there's like no Canadian detransitioners online. Like, I looked so hard. There was a journalist who was doing a piece on detransition from, she was Canadian. She was like, okay, but I want to interview, like, I talk to Americans, I talk to Brits, but I want to talk to Canadians. I'm a Canadian journalist. And I looked everywhere, like Tumblr, Twitter, Reddit. And I could find like two detransitioned Canadians, and they didn't want to talk to her.
Hmm.
And also, I'm very concerned. Like we don't talk about this very much, but since people are transitioning for more and more ridiculous reasons, and because you don't need to have dysphoria, I think that just means more and more gay kids are transitioning. So I'm actually really concerned about the gay boys who are transitioning to be trans women. Um, I have one friend like that, and there's almost no visibility whatsoever. That too, I posted everywhere I could think of, like Tumblr, Twitter, Reddit, um, asking like, "Are you a detransitioned homosexual male of any age, of any nationality? Like, please contact me." And I had one person contact me,
Hmm.
and I think there's definitely like a whole wave of gay boys who are being swept up into this right now,
Yeah.
and there is no framework for a support network
Yeah.
for them when
That's where a lot of the suicide is potentially going to happen.
100%. Like people always say, like, oh, if you get hormones and surgery, you won't like you won't be suicidal anymore. Like I literally know a trans man who got surgery and went on hormones and then killed himself. Like it doesn't fix your problems. Like that too is like if you want to transition, get therapy. Like figure out your depression, figure out your body image issues, figure out your sexuality, figure out your family issues, then transition. Because it's like Helena said when she like went on T, she didn't have the mental health to cope with what she was going through. Like puberty is horrible. If you're gonna go through your second puberty, you need to be like in the right headspace to handle that. Like you don't somebody who's suicidal, oh, I'll give them testosterone and they'll feel better. Like no, that's not how it works. Yeah, so I think that's another thing a lot of kids don't understand. And also like the trans children, they make me so upset because like even as a teenager, the idea that I could be like a gay male seemed totally realistic to me. I was like, once I have all the surgeries and stuff, I'll be like basically indistinguishable. Like not literally, but enough that it won't matter, and I can just live my life as a gay man. Like if you're like 7 years old and your parents are telling you that you'll just get surgery and hormones and everything will be normal, like no, things will not be normal. Everybody trans who goes through surgery and hormones becomes like a quasi female male person, and you have to live with that for the rest of your life, and it affects your ability to be sexually intimate with people. It affects your ability to reproduce. It affects like like your relationships, and sexuality is an important part of your life. And these children have no comprehension whatsoever of what's going on when they're like 6, 7 years old, and their parents are like, "Oh, it'll be fine. You'll transition." Like it really upsets me. Like Jazz Jennings went on um, hormone blockers. So then she had a micro penis, and they still decided to do the vaginoplasty. And then there's a bunch of complications because there wasn't enough flesh to do it. Like these kids are being experimented on and like abused, but through the guise of like progressiveness. So it's okay. It's so upsetting to me.
There's a weird, ironic, horribly ironic, like gallows humor, ironic um, reconfiguration of the conversion therapy laws. Like in the United States, there are these conversion therapy laws where if you're gay, your parents can't send you to no gay camp.
In some states.
In some states, now they're tweaking those to say that if you are trans, somebody trying to talk you out of that is conversion therapy.
Yeah.
The irony, the dark irony is that
That is conversion therapy.
transitioning is literal physical conversion. It's like
Yeah.
Your
Like
conversion. Your,
you're turning a gay person into a straight person,
yeah.
like visually from the
And
outside.
it's like it's post facto. It's like me taking my car into a shop. I'm sorry, trans people, and turning it into a convertible. Like it's gonna be like not a perfect convertible anymore. I'm converting it into a convertible, but like it's not gonna be what it
Yeah,
was, even if I
it didn't
wanted
have
it.
a framework to begin with to look like a real convertible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. I should let you go. I'm gonna link all your stuff. Your videos are wonderful. They're straight to the point. You even got
Thanks.
cats going on in the background.
Yeah. My room
Are
is really small and it's their favorite room, so they're always here.
are you are you getting in contact with people, setting up or becoming aware of resources for people in your positions and in your position, and also male detransitioners? Is
Um,
that framework there yet?
well, that's something I'm kind of interested in is I would like to do some kind of project with some homosexual male detransitioners just to raise awareness. So that might happen in the future, maybe, but like I said, it's really hard to find them.
Yeah.
I personally like I have support groups. If you yourself are detransitioned or considering detransition, um, I have Discord servers and secret Facebook groups I can add you to.
Okay.
So contact me.
Through Twitter and
Yeah, Twitter. I'm always on Twitter, but
okay.
yeah, Tumblr, Reddit, YouTube, whatever. Um, yeah, support networks. Yeah, I don't really have any specific resources, but I think it would be good if I could talk to, I mean, like all this stuff is in the future. My immediate plans are just to get my personal story out, but um, it would be good to talk to some therapists. I would love to interview some therapists on my channels about different ways of actually like treating dysphoria or coping mechanisms for dysphoria, because like it's almost never talked about. You're just giving like coping mechanism for anxiety, and then they don't really go into it.
Mm-hmm.
And like in my videos are very explicit. I'd like to go into everything very explicitly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just spoke with a therapist who specializes in this named Sasha Ayad. I will send you her Twitter contact, and the interview with her will be up in very shortly.
Mhm.
So she'd be one, and she'd probably be able to also get you plugged into other resources.
Cool. Yeah. So like in a few weeks for sure, or a few months.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm also moving in 2 months, so it's
Oh, well,
like I
there you
have.
go.
Yeah.
Constant transition with you.
Yeah. Exactly. Um, Thank you so much for having me on your channel. Um,
Thank you, Ben.
I can't even tell you. Like 5 years ago, I was the only gender critical detransitioned man on Twitter, and now there's like at least 10 of us. Like
There's nothing wrong with it. There are dozens of us. Dozens!
But
um,
your Twitter is GNC something. I can never remember the last.
everything is GNC-centric,
What's GNC?
gender nonconforming.
Okay.
So, because when I detransitioned, I kind of thought of it as like, well, now I'm a gender nonconforming woman, and a lot of detrans people are gender nonconforming, and a lot of gay people are gender nonconforming, and
Huh.
yeah, I, I feel like that's a really
Hmm.
like I'm a gender abolitionist, so it makes sense to me to be like screw gender. Yeah. Like my first when I first became gender critical, my first URL was fuck your gender ID. Like it was really like I'm on the other side now.
Yeah, right?
But
You come out swinging. When you
yeah,
decide
it
to
was
do something, you really do it.
yeah, and like everybody on Twitter or on Tumblr was like losing their crap. They're like, you can't even talk to this person. Look at their URL, and I'm like, I'm trans. So, um, I don't know. That was great, but yeah, GNC-centric. That's me
Well,
on all
you're the
forms.
kind of social justice warrior we need more of.
Oh, thank you. I didn't don't consider myself a social justice warrior, but
That
I
was
know
a
people.
joke. I wasn't.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you're just a fighter.
Thanks.
All right, Ben. You have a good day. I'll let you know when this is up, okay?
You too, Ben.
And yeah, keep in touch, okay?
Bye.
Ciao.